The reason corrupt leaders thrive isn't what you think. It's not just manipulation or power. It's something inside you. Yes, you. You're wired to crave comfort over truth, security over integrity. But what if that craving is fueling everything you claim to hate about the system? Let's explore this uncomfortable reality. The trap of comfort is more powerful than most people want to admit. When confronted with corruption, the easy explanation is to blame manipulation or ignorance or the cleverness of those in charge. But what really keeps corrupt leaders in power is something closer to home: our own willingness to trade integrity for a sense of security. There's a calculation happening inside you, often without your awareness. Standing up to wrongdoing means risking uncertainty, discomfort, and the loss of whatever stability you've managed to hold on to. Most people choose the path of least resistance, clinging to the illusion of order, even when it costs them their principles. This isn't a random flaw, it's a pattern rooted in human psychology. Arthur Schopenhauer called it the blind will, a force that doesn't care about logic or morality, only about what feels safe and familiar. He put it bluntly: man can indeed do what he wants, but he cannot will what he wants. You might think you're making conscious, rational choices, but most of the time, you're pulled toward comfort without even realizing it. In politics, this blind will offers a tempting escape. At least things aren't worse. At least you have a job, a roof, some predictability. So even when corruption is obvious, people stick to what they know, because the alternative, change, feels too risky. Picture this. On one side, you have junk food, easy, satisfying, and instantly rewarding. On the other, you have a long, difficult journey toward better health. The junk food is corruption. You know it's bad for you, but it's familiar and comforting. The healthy meal is integrity and truth, harder to reach, requiring effort and sacrifice. Most people, when faced with this choice, go for what's easy even as they recognize the harm. That's not just laziness, it's your wiring at work, steering you toward immediate relief over long-term benefit. The Enron scandal is a perfect case in point. Jeffrey Skilling promised investors and employees a future of endless growth and innovation. Even as warning signs mounted, fraudulent accounting, suspicious profits, people ignored the evidence. Why? Because believing in Enron's success felt safer than facing the chaos of collapse. Employees kept quiet to protect their jobs. Investors clung to hope, rationalizing every red flag. The comfort of believing in a stable future overrode the reality of mounting corruption. This isn't just a story about corporate greed. It's a window into how the desire for comfort makes people complicit, even when the facts are staring them in the face. But the story doesn't end with passive acceptance. Sometimes, the decision to tolerate corruption is active. It's not just that people are fooled or lulled into complacency. They choose to look away. They construct elaborate rationalizations to avoid facing uncomfortable truths. People tell themselves stories. Every company has problems. This is just how business works. Or, if this leadership fails, things could get even worse. These justifications make it easier to sideline ethics, push aside critical thinking, and embrace a false sense of security. The rationalization trap is powerful because it lets you feel safe without having to confront the cost of that safety. Why do people actively rationalize actions they know are wrong? The answer is as unsettling as it is simple. Comfort feels safer than change. Challenging corruption means shaking the foundation you depend on. It means risking your career, your relationships, your sense of belonging. That fear seeps into every decision, encouraging you to stick with what you know, even when what you know is deeply flawed. Schopenhauer's blind will is at work here, drawing you toward emotional ease and away from the hard work of ethical action. There's another layer to this trap. Admitting your chosen leader, company, or system is corrupt means admitting you were wrong. That's a blow to your ego, and most people will do anything to avoid it. So instead, they minimize, rationalize, or outright deny the evidence. It's easier to believe that your leader is flawed but effective than to confront the possibility that you've played a part in something harmful. The more normalized this mindset becomes, the easier it is to excuse corruption. All leaders are corrupt, people say, as if that settles the matter. It shifts responsibility away from the individual and onto some vague, broken system, making it easier to shrug and move on. The real danger is how this cycle feeds on itself. The effort required to imagine something different, a future without corruption, feels overwhelming. The present, even when it's rotten, is immediate and tangible. The blind will doesn't want ideals, it wants comfort right now. Corrupt leaders understand this instinct. They position themselves as the only defense against chaos, the guardians of whatever stability you have left. And you let them, not because you're powerless, but because you're wired to seek comfort, even when it comes at a high cost. This is the uncomfortable truth. The desire for comfort isn't just a personal weakness. It's a deep, irrational force that shapes your choices, often without your conscious awareness. But what if that force, the blind will, has more control over your decisions than you realize? Schopenhauer's concept of the blind will sits at the core of why people cling to corrupt leaders, even when the truth is right in front of them. This isn't just philosophy for its own sake. It's a force that shapes your choices from the inside out. The blind will isn't interested in evidence or ethics. It acts beneath conscious thought, always searching for the quickest path to relief, comfort, and emotional safety. When you find yourself defending a leader who's failed you or making excuses for behavior you'd never tolerate in anyone else, that's not just a lapse in judgment. It's the blind will at work, pulling you toward what feels good and away from anything that threatens your sense of stability. Schopenhauer didn't sugarcoat it. The blind will is ruthless, and it doesn't care about reason, morals, or the future. It desires, and that's all. It drives you toward satisfaction, even when that satisfaction is shallow or destructive. This is why, when faced with overwhelming evidence of corruption, people often respond with loyalty or indifference instead of outrage. The logical mind gets bypassed. What matters is the relief that comes from a comforting promise, a familiar face, or the hope that tomorrow will look much like today. You've probably seen this in your own life. Maybe you stayed in a toxic job because leaving meant facing the unknown. Or you clung to a relationship that made you miserable simply because the pain of change felt worse than the pain of staying. Even when you know better, the blind will whispers that the mess you know is safer than the uncertainty you fear. Now, scale that up to a society making choices about its leaders, and you begin to see why corruption is so persistent. The will doesn't care about what's right. It cares about what's easy. Corrupt systems thrive on this dynamic. Leaders don't need to be brilliant manipulators. They just need to tap into your desire for comfort and relief. It doesn't matter how many facts are presented or how clear the evidence is. The blind will isn't swayed by logic. It responds to emotional shortcuts. A reassuring slogan, a staged display of empathy, a promise to restore lost greatness. These are not rational calculations. They are automatic, instinctive responses that bypass your critical thinking and go straight to your emotional core. Schopenhauer put it bluntly, "Man can indeed do what he wants, but he cannot will what he wants." You may believe you're making deliberate, rational decisions, but your desires are already being shaped by forces you don't fully see. The will makes the choice, and your conscious mind scrambles to justify it after the fact. That's how someone can look at a leader mired in scandal and still insist they're the best option. It's not a reasoned conclusion. It's self-deception, dressed up as logic. If you want to see this in action, look no further than the collapse of Enron. Employees and investors ignored glaring red flags, not because they were naive, but because they desperately wanted to believe in the company's promise of limitless success. The blind will latched onto hope, even as evidence of fraud piled up. People rationalized every warning sign, telling themselves that stability and prosperity were just around the corner. It wasn't a lack of intelligence. It was a refusal to let go of the comfort that came from believing in a leader who promised everything, even as he delivered disaster. This shortcut around critical thinking has serious consequences. People will cheer for a leader even when the failures are obvious. Loyalty deepens after a scandal, not because the leader deserves it, but because admitting the truth would mean facing discomfort, uncertainty, and the pain of being wrong. The blind will doesn't want that. It wants to feel right, to feel safe, and it will fight to protect those feelings, even if it means ignoring reality. Supporters of corrupt leaders often say things like, "All politicians are corrupt," or, "At least they're on our side." These aren't just defenses of the leader, they're defenses of the supporter's own emotional state. It's easier to rationalize corruption than to face the truth that you've been deceived or that the system you trusted is broken. The blind will ties your emotions so tightly to your choices that questioning those choices feels like questioning yourself. The fear of instability, the need for security, and the desire to belong all become tools for manipulation. Leaders who understand this don't need to win arguments or present evidence. They only need to feed your will what it's already hungry for: comfort, hope, and a sense of belonging. That's how irrational desires don't just make you vulnerable, they make you complicit. They create the conditions for corruption to flourish, because the blind will would rather cling to a comforting lie than face an uncomfortable truth. But there's another layer to this. What happens when leaders go beyond simply benefiting from your blind will and start actively shaping your emotions, using fear, nostalgia, and hope as tools to secure your loyalty? This is where the real manipulation begins. Your fears and hopes aren't just private emotions, they're leverage points. Leaders who want your loyalty know exactly how to use them. Emotional manipulation isn't an accident or a side effect, it's a strategy. The most successful corrupt leaders aren't necessarily the smartest or most capable. They're the ones who know how to tap into your anxieties, your longing for a better future, and your memories of a world that felt simpler, even if that world never truly existed. Start with fear. It's raw and immediate, built into your biology to protect you from danger. But in the hands of someone seeking power, fear becomes a tool. Leaders use fear-based messaging to highlight threats, real or exaggerated, and trigger your survival instincts. When you're afraid, your ability to think critically narrows. Instead of weighing facts or questioning motives, you focus on safety. That's exactly what these leaders count on. They cast themselves as protectors against chaos, promising security if you just trust them. In moments of crisis, economic collapse, social unrest, or war, this tactic becomes even more effective. People become desperate for order, and anyone who claims to provide it gains an instant advantage. The research is clear. Fear bypasses your reasoning and makes you cling to the familiar, even when the familiar is deeply flawed. But fear isn't the only lever. Hope is just as powerful and often more subtle. Where fear grabs you by the throat, hope lifts you up. Leaders use hope to paint grand visions of the future, offering promises that are vague enough for you to fill in the gaps with your own dreams. You hear slogans about a better tomorrow or restoring greatness, and you start to imagine what that could mean for you. The brilliance of this tactic is that the leader doesn't have to provide details. You do the work for them, building emotional bonds to their vision, not because of evidence, but because of what you want to believe. Hope can make you overlook the cracks, ignore the lack of substance, and forgive repeated failures, because the alternative is too bleak to face. Then there's nostalgia, which is perhaps the most intoxicating of all. Nostalgia isn't just about remembering the past. It's about longing for a version of the past that may never have existed. Research describes it as a craving for a lost golden age, an era of order, identity, or greatness that's more fantasy than fact. Leaders exploit this by promising to bring back what you think you've lost, even if you never truly had it. They conjure images of a perfect society, a time when everything made sense and everyone had their place. In periods of uncertainty or upheaval, this message is irresistible. You reach for the comfort of a story that soothes your anxiety, even if it's built on illusion. The emotional pull of nostalgia grows stronger when life feels unstable. It becomes a shield against the confusion and discomfort of the present. You don't need proof that things were ever as good as promised. What matters is how the memory, or the fantasy, makes you feel. Leaders know this. They don't need to explain how they'll restore the past. They just need to make you want it badly enough that you stop asking questions. Nostalgia becomes a shortcut to trust, a way to silence your doubts and convince you that the leader is the only one who understands what you've lost. All three of these emotional strings, fear, hope, nostalgia, work because they bypass your rational mind. They don't compete with facts or arguments. They go straight to your core. Emotional appeals override critical thinking, making you more likely to accept promises without scrutiny and defend leaders without evidence. This isn't just theory. It's how your brain works. When a message taps into your deepest fears or dreams, it feels urgent and real, no matter how little it's grounded in reality. Look at how these tactics play out in political campaigns. When a leader emphasizes threats, whether from outsiders, social change, or moral decline, they activate your need for protection. You rally behind them, even if it means sacrificing freedoms or supporting questionable policies. The fear of losing stability outweighs the facts that contradict the leader's narrative. When hope is the tool, you become invested in the idea of transformation, often at the expense of seeing the gaps between promise and possibility. And when nostalgia is invoked, you stop questioning whether the past was ever as good as claimed. You just want to believe it was, because that belief feels better than facing a messy, uncertain present. This is why emotional manipulation is so effective. It doesn't just influence your choices, it shapes your sense of what's possible, what's right, and who you trust. Once these emotions are tied to a leader, they become part of your identity. You're not just following a person, you're defending a version of yourself, a story about who you are and what you believe in. That's why, even when a leader betrays your trust or fails to deliver, it feels almost impossible to let go. So, the real question isn't just why leaders use these tactics. It's why you keep defending them, even after they've let you down. The answer lies in how deeply your loyalty and your sense of self have become entangled. Admitting that a leader you supported is corrupt isn't just uncomfortable. It feels like a threat to who you are. You might see the evidence, hear the accusations, and even recognize the failures. But instead of letting go, you find yourself defending them, questioning the critics, and searching for reasons to explain it all away. This isn't about blind loyalty or ignorance. It's about the identity trap, the way your support for a leader becomes a reflection of your own values and beliefs. When you back someone, it's not just their reputation on the line, it's yours. The moment you tie your hopes, your ideals, and your vision for the future to a leader, their actions start to feel personal. If they fall, you feel exposed. Admitting a leader's corruption feels like admitting you were wrong. Cognitive dissonance in action. The discomfort isn't just intellectual, it's emotional. You start to rationalize their actions, making excuses for lies, overlooking failures, and justifying even the most blatant wrongdoing. It's easier to find a reason why the evidence must be flawed than to accept the sting of being deceived. Nobody likes to feel foolish or betrayed, so your mind works overtime to protect your self-image. Cognitive dissonance is a powerful force. When you're holding two conflicting beliefs, knowing a leader is corrupt, but still wanting to believe in them, your brain tries to resolve the tension. It's easier to dismiss the evidence than to question your own judgment. You tell yourself, maybe it's not as bad as it looks, or the media is out to get them. This isn't just about defending the leader, it's about defending yourself from the pain of being wrong. Think about Richard Nixon and the Watergate scandal. Even as the evidence became overwhelming, many of Nixon's supporters clung to justifications. They argued that the accusations were politically motivated, that the other side was worse, or that Nixon's achievements outweighed his mistakes. The loyalty didn't disappear, it hardened. Supporters doubled down, not because they couldn't see the truth, but because accepting it meant rewriting their own story. The risk of feeling humiliated or exposed was too great, so they found ways to explain it all away. Then there's the sunk cost fallacy, another trap that keeps people loyal long after a leader's failures are clear. You commit time, energy, and even your reputation to supporting someone. You debate friends, defend policies, post online, maybe even donate money or volunteer. Each act of support is an investment, a piece of yourself tied to the leader's success. When the truth of corruption surfaces, stepping back would mean admitting all that effort was wasted. According to toxic leadership research, followers often continue defending a leader because acknowledging the loss feels unbearable. You convince yourself that if you just hold on, things will improve and your investment will pay off. Instead, you dig in deeper, justifying past decisions in an effort to avoid the pain of loss. This cycle is relentless. Loyalty, discomfort, and emotional investment combine until defending a corrupt leader feels like defending your own character. Every new scandal becomes another test of your resolve. Instead of breaking the bond, it strengthens it. You start to see critics as enemies, evidence as attacks, and the leader's failures as forgivable mistakes. The more you invest, the harder it becomes to step away. You're not just protecting the leader, you're protecting your sense of who you are. But there's more to it than just personal psychology. Defending a leader also means defending your place in your community. Political loyalty is rarely a private affair. It's tied to your social groups, your family, your friendships. Questioning your support can feel like questioning your belonging. The fear of isolation, of being cast out or misunderstood, makes it even harder to let go. You don't want to risk your relationships, so you stay silent or become even more vocal in your defense. The need to fit in, to stay connected, pushes you to hold the line, even if you have private doubts. This is how the identity trap works. It's not just about one person's pride or stubbornness. It's about the deep need to feel consistent, to avoid shame, and to protect your place in the world. Leaders know this. They count on it. As long as your identity is tied to their image, they can count on your support, no matter what they do. But what happens when this pattern isn't just personal, but collective? When the urge to defend a leader becomes a group instinct reinforced by everyone around you? That's when the power of the crowd takes over, shaping not just individual choices, but the direction of entire communities. You feel the crowd's pressure so intensely that speaking up feels like risking your safety. That's the reality of herd mentality, an invisible force that overrides your doubts and pulls you into line, even when your instincts are screaming that something's wrong. It's not just about agreeing with the group. It's about the primal fear of being cast out, of standing alone against a tide that could turn on you in an instant. This pressure isn't subtle, it's overwhelming, and it shapes your choices in ways you might not even notice. Herd mentality works because the fear of exclusion is hardwired. Since childhood, you've learned that belonging equals safety. In politics, this instinct is manipulated on a massive scale. The more support a corrupt leader gathers, the more dangerous it feels to stand apart. At a certain point, it's not about what you believe, it's about survival. You go along, not because you're convinced, but because the alternative feels like social suicide. When the group moves, you move. When the group applauds, you clap. It's easier to blend in than to risk being singled out. Public opinion acts like a tidal wave. Even if you hesitate, the sheer force of the majority pushes you forward. Supporting a corrupt system stops feeling like a choice and starts feeling inevitable. Conformity becomes the shield you use to protect yourself from discomfort, criticism, or isolation. If everyone else is supporting the leader, questioning that consensus feels reckless. You might not even realize you're suppressing your doubts. You just know it's safer to stay quiet. As the research shows, people suppress doubts to maintain group unity, and this is exactly how groupthink takes hold. The stampede metaphor isn't just dramatic, it's accurate. In a real stampede, not everyone wants to run in the same direction, but the energy of the group is too much to resist. You might see the danger ahead, but the pressure from all sides makes it nearly impossible to stop, let alone turn back. Herd mentality in politics works the same way. Individual thought gets crushed, replaced by the momentum of the collective. Even if you see the disaster coming, the risk of breaking from the group feels greater than the risk of following it over the edge. Groupthink is the psychological engine behind this. It's not just about going along with the group. It's about actively pushing away your own doubts to preserve harmony. Dissent feels like a threat, not just to the leader, but to the group's identity. So you silence yourself, or worse, convince yourself that the flaws don't matter. If everyone else is on board, how bad can it be? The corrupt leader doesn't rise alone. A majority opens the door, each person driven by the same fears, illusions, and a desperate need to belong. But the consequences go even deeper. When enough people accept corruption, it stops looking like corruption at all. It becomes normal. Society starts to shrug at dishonesty, to see it as inevitable. That's just how politics works, you hear, or better to have a corrupt leader on our side than risk the unknown. The more this thinking spreads, the more entrenched it becomes. Corruption isn't just tolerated, it's expected. Envy plays a role here that most people won't admit. Corrupt leaders project power, freedom from rules, and a kind of untouchable confidence. For some, that's not just impressive, it's something to aspire to. You hear people say, "If I were them, I'd do the same," revealing a secret admiration for those who break the rules and get away with it. This envy turns outrage into acceptance, and sometimes even into respect. The stigma around corruption fades, replaced by a twisted kind of admiration. Over time, this erodes the values that once held leaders accountable, leaving a culture where rule-breaking isn't a flaw, it's a sign of strength. This is how herd mentality creates a self-reinforcing cycle. The more people conform, the more society adapts to corruption. It spreads like a fire, one person rationalizing, another staying silent, until the whole landscape is changed. Groupthink stifles dissent. Public opinion sweeps up the hesitant, and normalization cements the new reality. Corruption isn't just allowed, it becomes the standard. So, if you ever wonder why this pattern keeps repeating, why it's so hard to break free from the grip of corrupt leaders, you need to look beyond the surface. It's not just about fear or the desire to fit in. It's about the emotional comfort, the social safety, and even the envy that binds you to the group. The real challenge isn't just recognizing this cycle, but finding the courage to confront your own role in it. Breaking the cycle starts with a blunt, honest look at yourself. Not at the leaders, not at the system, but at your own choices. It's tempting to believe corruption is always someone else's fault, that you're just caught in the current. But systems don't persist on their own. They're held up by the silent approval, the rationalizations, and the small daily compromises of ordinary people. The hard question isn't, why are leaders corrupt? It's, why do so many people let corruption stand? The first step in changing anything is to admit your own role, however small. That's not about wallowing in guilt. It's about taking responsibility for what you do and what you ignore. Ask yourself, where have you chosen comfort over truth? Where have you looked away, stayed silent, or followed the crowd because it was easier? Maybe you told yourself it wasn't your problem, or that speaking up would only make things worse. Maybe you made excuses, minimized the damage, or convinced yourself that the alternatives were too risky. These are the moments that feed corruption, even if you don't intend them to. If you never confront them, you'll keep repeating the same patterns, trapped in the same cycle you claim to hate. Schopenhauer's philosophy makes this struggle clear. He argued that you're not driven by rational thought, but by a blind, irrational will, a force inside you that craves comfort and avoids pain. That will whispers, the system's too big to change, keeping you passive. It doesn't care about ethics or accountability. It wants relief, and it tells you whatever you need to hear to avoid discomfort. Recognizing this blind will is essential. Without that awareness, you're just reacting, letting your unconscious desires make your decisions for you. So, how do you fight back? The answer is self-awareness, and it's more than just a buzzword, it's a discipline. Next time you hear a promise or a speech that stirs something in you, pause. Ask yourself, am I craving security, or am I actually evaluating the evidence? Are my emotions being triggered, or am I thinking clearly? This is how you catch yourself in the act, by questioning your own motives, not just the leaders. When you notice yourself feeling defensive, hopeful, or nostalgic, dig deeper. Where are those feelings coming from? Are they being manipulated? This kind of self-interrogation isn't comfortable, but it's the only way to stop the blind will from running your life on autopilot. Herd mentality is another trap. The pressure to conform is real, and breaking away from it is hard. When everyone around you is silent or supportive, speaking out feels dangerous. But silence is complicity. Going along with the group doesn't absolve you, it just makes you another cog in the machine. Resisting herd pressure means being willing to stand alone, to raise your voice, and to accept that you might lose friends, status, or comfort in the process. The alternative is to keep feeding the very system you claim to oppose. There are countless examples of people who've broken this cycle. Movements for justice, reform, and accountability always start with individuals who question their own assumptions and refuse to stay quiet. They don't just challenge leaders, they challenge the collective willingness to look away. Real change happens when people decide to disrupt their own comfort, to stop making excuses, and to demand something better. You don't need to be a hero or a martyr. You just need to be honest, persistent, and willing to act, even when it's uncomfortable. But change isn't just about what you do alone. Influence spreads. When you think critically, speak out, or withdraw your support from corrupt leaders, you set an example. Your actions give others permission to do the same. Movements grow from these small acts of courage. One person can inspire another, and slowly, the cracks in the system widen. If you want a different outcome, it starts with you refusing to play your old part. Practical steps matter. Investigate the history of those in power. Document patterns, share what you find, and talk to others who see what you see. Build alliances with people who value truth over comfort. If you're in a position to confront a toxic leader, do it with a group that has credibility and focus on the impact, not just the personality. If all else fails, push for structural changes, term limits, regular reviews, protections for whistleblowers. These aren't just abstract ideals, they're the tools that make accountability possible. Education is another key. The more people understand how their fears and desires are manipulated, the less power those tactics have. Encourage critical thinking, challenge stereotypes, and help others see how easy it is to fall into the same traps. The more self-aware a community becomes, the harder it is for corruption to take root. Here's something you can do right now. Comment one way you've challenged group pressure before. Even a small act, asking a hard question, refusing to go along with a bad decision, supporting someone who spoke out, can make a difference. Sharing your experience isn't just about you. It's about giving others the courage to do the same. The truth is, breaking the cycle is hard. It means confronting your own blind spots, risking your comfort, and accepting that you've played a part in the problem. But it's also the only way to reclaim your integrity and help build a world where truth matters more than convenience. When enough people make that choice, the system starts to change, not because the leaders want it, but because the followers demand it. Yourself, why? Are you chasing security, or are you actually weighing the facts? Self-awareness isn't just personal growth, it's the foundation of real change. If this video made you rethink your own biases, like and subscribe. Challenge yourself to stop feeding the system and start questioning it, one decision at a time.